the 10 most criminally successful crimes of all time. Criminal activity may be more successful today than ever before. Whether the crime is outdated, violent, or illegal on the federal level, there are always new options for criminals to choose from. This video will quickly look at the most criminally successful crimes of all time. Although this does not include every single crime in history, it does cover many of the most well-known criminal activity schemes in both recent history and long-term past criminality that has been recorded by multiple sources. Number 1. The New York Black Hand. As the 19th century came to a close, New York became the world's largest Italian city. Nearly 1 million Italians arrived in the United States between 1904 and 1907, with many settling in New York. An estimated 35,000 to 40,000 men who had been criminals in the Old Country went unnoticed in this flood of immigration. Law-abiding Italian Americans were increasingly preyed upon by the new underground organization known as La Mano Nera, the Society of the Black Hand. The police dubbed the Italian quarter the bomb zone because so many businesses were blown up. As Stefan Talti puts it in his gripping new book, The Black Hand, the infamous crime organization engaged in extortion, assassination, child kidnapping, and bombings on a grand scale. Only the Ku Klux Klan would surpass the Black Hand for the production of mass terror in the early part of this century. Tammany Hall and the almost entirely Irish police force ignored them. The Italians were inhabitants of a distant planet in Tammany's universe. The Italian immigrants were partly to blame for this. They were New York's fastest-growing segment in the years preceding World War I, but they had no representation because Italians were notorious for not voting, for clinging to memories of their orchards and town squares at the expense of assimilating into the new country. At the turn of the century, 90% of Irish immigrants were American citizens, but by 1912, fewer than half of their Italian counterparts had been naturalized. The Italian community did have one person fighting for them. Joseph Petrosino was a short, stout, barrel-chested man, built like a stevedore known as the Italian Sherlock Holmes. He was born in 1860 in Padula, province of Salerno, southern Italy. His father, a tailor, brought the family to New York in 1873. Petrosino was forced to drop out of school after the 6th grade, but he was well-read and skilled in the arts and music. His favorite composer was Verdi. Petrosino rose through the ranks of the New York Police Department. Thanks to his photographic memory and talent for disguising himself as street people from Italian neighborhoods, one of his favorites was to appear as an organ grinder. In 1895, he was assigned to the Homicide Division by Police Commissioner Theodore Roosevelt, and in 1908, he was named head of the newly formed Italian Squad and given the authority to choose 5 detectives to work with him, which was New York's only response to the plague of Italian-American crime for many years. It was the country's first such bureau. They were the true untouchables in the ongoing war against organized crime, battling a group that terrorized judges, governors, mayors, lawyers, Italian celebrities like Enrico Caruso, and possibly, in 1907, even the Chicago Cubs. Number 2, the Lufthansa Heist. On December 11, 1978, a group of masked robbers raided the Lufthansa Airlines cargo building at New York's JFK Airport, stealing more than $5 million in cash, $21 million in today's dollars, and nearly $1 million in jewelry. The Lufthansa Heist, as it is known today, is regarded as one of the greatest in U.S. history. Peter Grunewald, a Lufthansa cargo worker at JFK Airport, devised the scheme. Grunewald was aware that Lufthansa routinely flew large amounts of unmarked cash from Europe to JFK to U.S. currency exchanged abroad by American tourists and servicemen. Typically, this money would be transferred to American banks immediately via Brinks trucks. However, delays caused the cash delivery to arrive after the last truck of the day had left, which meant it was stored at the airport until the next business day and vulnerable to theft. Grunewald presented his plan to fellow cargo worker and friend Louis Werner in the hopes that it would be put into action. Werner, unfortunately for Grunewald, saw the robbery as an opportunity to get out from under a mountain of personal gambling debt and turned on his friend. He took Grunewald's plan to a local bookmaker, Martin Krugman, who passed it on to his friend, infamous mobster-turned-movie consultant Henry Hill. Hill was a member of a gang led by James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke, as depicted in the film Goodfellas. Jimmy's crew had become closely associated with the Lucchese crime family and had amassed a solid reputation in the seedy world of organized crime after years of earning money through nefarious deeds. Burke and Hill took charge of the robbery planning. JFK was well known to Jimmy's crew. When they needed quick cash, they went to the airport. The crew frequently hijacked trucks from JFK, frequently taking 2 or 3 trucks per week for quick cash. They knew how to move merchandise to make extra money, whether it was televisions, clothes, or food. Burke and Hill put together a robbery team and waited for word from Werner, his inside man. On December 11, around 3 a.m., a black van carrying the masked men pulled up to Lufthansa's storage area. While the getaway van was brought to the back, the men entered the building. They stormed in, guns drawn, rounding up the night shift workers and handcuffing them in the break room. To avoid setting off alarms, the gunmen forced a supervisor to open the 10 by 20-foot vault. The cash and jewels were loaded into the van, and the crew drove away quietly. Unfortunately, they did not get away completely unscathed. Rather than taking the van to be crushed in a mob-controlled junkyard the night of the robbery, getaway driver Parnell Stephen Stacks Edwards got drunk and left it parked illegally on a Brooklyn street, where it was discovered with his fingerprints and footprints inside. Burke cut ties with Edwards and his crew, and the driver became the first suspect in the crime to be killed. As Burke became increasingly paranoid and greedy for a larger share of the looted cash, the dominoes began to fall fairly quickly. Krugman was the next to pass away, on January 6, 1979. By the summer of that year, 8 of the robbery's participants were dead or missing. The FBI turned its attention to the inside man Louis Werner after being unable to connect anything to Jimmy and Henry's crew, and with mobster bodies piling up. Werner was convicted for his role in the heist thanks to Grunewald's testimony, but he refused to cooperate or hand over his co-conspirators. It appeared that the Bureau would never solve the case or bring those responsible to justice. These good fellas believed they had a license to steal, a license to kill, and a license to do whatever they wanted. George Van Islo's, FBI assistant director in charge in the New York field office. The investigation finally came to a halt in the spring of 1980, when Hill was arrested on 6 drug-related charges. It wasn't long before he flipped, persuaded by the FBI to testify not only against Burke, but also against Lucchese family underboss Paul Vario. Burke was convicted on 2 separate counts: a basketball point shaving scheme and an unrelated murder as a result of Hill's testimony, and Jimmy the Gent died in prison in 1996. Vario was convicted of racketeering in 1988 and died in prison. Number 3. The BrinksMat Robbery. The story of the largest gold heist in British history serves as a cautionary tale about how flimsy the concept of honor among thieves is, especially when the prize is worth a whopping £26 million. However, it appears that stupidity was present on all sides. Despite the short-sightedness of some of the criminals involved, who tossed money around like water, the police failed to apprehend the majority of those involved in the raid and subsequent distribution, nor did they ever recover the majority of the bullion. On November 26, 1983, at 6:30 in the morning, a South London gang of 6 armed robbers led by Brian Robinson and Mickey McAvoy broke into the BrinksMat warehouse at Heathrow Airport, expecting to steal around £3 million in cash. Anthony Black, a BrinksMat security guard who happened to be living with Brian Robinson's sister at the time, provided inside assistance. The gang gained quick access to the site thanks to Black's information, where they overpowered the guards and threatened to set fire to them if they did not provide the combination to the safe. When the safe was finally opened, the expected piles of easily transported cash turned out to be 6,800 gold bars divided into 76 cases, as well as a stash of £100,000 worth of cut and uncut diamonds, all bound for the Far East, thanks to Black's information. It quickly became clear that transporting many tons of gold would be difficult, and the quick smash and grab operation turned into a lengthy operation as several members of the gang were dispatched to seek sturdier transport. The gang loaded the gold into the getaway van using the warehouse's forklift truck, but it still took them nearly 2 hours to empty the safe. They had left the BrinksMat warehouse by 8:15 in the morning, and one of the guards had raised the alarm at 8:30. The conversion of £26 million in bullion into cash proved to be a major headache for the gang, forcing them to approach a senior underworld figure known only as the Fox. He had the necessary gangland connections to smelt and distribute the gold, namely the Adams family, one of London's most notorious crime syndicates. They enlisted the help of a jeweler named Solly Nahom, who agreed to sell the melted-down goods. McAvoy and Robinson were sentenced to 25 years in prison for breaking into the BrinksMat warehouse at Heathrow Airport on November 26, 1983. Noy discovered DC John Fordham in his garden at his Kent home in January 1985 and stabbed him to death. 1986, Noy is put on the run after 11 bars of gold are discovered in his home. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Kenneth Noy was released in 1990, but 10 years later was convicted of murdering Stephen Cameron in a road rage incident on the M2516 in November 2001. Number 4. The Great Train Robbery. The Great Train Robbery, in British history, the armed robbery of £2,600,000, mostly in used bank notes, from the Glasgow-London Royal Mail train near Bridego Bridge north of London on August 8, 1963. The 15 hold-up men, who were dressed in helmets, ski masks, and gloves, were helped by 2 accomplices, an anonymous insider who provided sensitive train schedule and cargo information, and another who provided a country hideaway, Leatherslade Farm in Buckinghamshire. Bruce Reynolds, a well-known burglar and armed robber, led the ring. The robbers stopped the train by deactivating a green track signal and activating a red signal with batteries. The engineer was severely injured by a blow to the head after the train's firemen went to investigate. The robbers drove about 120 mail bags to their farm hideout, where they divided the loot. 6 thieves were then hired to burn down the farmhouse, but they did such a poor job that the police discovered everyone's fingerprints. With this and other evidence, 12 of the 15 robbers were apprehended, convicted, and imprisoned, none serving more than 13 years. One of them, Ronnie Biggs, escaped from prison in 1965, had his face altered through plastic surgery, and fled to Paris, Australia, and finally Brazil. Biggs returned to the United Kingdom in 2001 and was arrested again. Number 5, Emilio Peralta Bank Heist. Cesar Emilio Peralta, alias Celebuzador, is a notorious drug trafficker in the Dominican Republic. Peralta rose from a small-scale distributor in the 1990s to one of the Caribbean's most important cocaine traffickers by the mid-2010, leading his own network. He connected South American suppliers with distributors in Puerto Rico and the United States. Peralta's network, which allegedly included former Dominican President Danilo Medina Sanchez, 2012 to 2020, became involved in heroin trafficking, human trafficking, and money laundering. He was apprehended in December 2019 in Cartagena, Colombia, after attracting the attention of U.S. authorities, and he faces extradition to the U.S. Peralta's organization appears to have been made up of a small hierarchical core and a looser network. It was primarily involved in 3 types of criminal activity: drug trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking. The organization smuggled Colombian cocaine and heroin into the Dominican Republic from Colombia and Venezuela. The drug was then shipped to Puerto Rico and the United States mainland. Peralta allegedly trafficked at least 1,120 kilograms of cocaine to Puerto Rico and the U.S. mainland between 2008 and 2017, though many believe the total amount trafficked was likely much higher. Peralta used frontmen to control a diverse portfolio of businesses, real estate, and luxury goods to launder his illicit earnings. According to documents obtained from the Dominican Republic's Attorney General's office and seen by Incite Crime, his organization established a money laundering division comprised of at least 23 family members and associates who laundered approximately $60 million. Peralta allegedly worked with an affiliate on a separate money laundering network that laundered over $260 million between 2017 and 2020. As a result, the Peralta drug trafficking organization established or collaborated with the human trafficking network. The network allegedly sent Colombian and Venezuelan women to the Dominican Republic to work in several large nightclubs where the group laundered money. Colombian authorities believe Peralta also had operations exploiting women in Colombia, according to media outlet Licensed Diario, citing a senior Cartagena police official. Peralta's involvement in these criminal economies was fueled by corruption. He allegedly paid off at least one Dominican politician through his organization, which included several former military officers. Peralta also stated in an intercepted phone call that he had contributed millions to the electoral campaign of former Dominican President Danilo Medina Sanchez. Medina acknowledged receiving campaign contributions from Peralta, but claimed he had no idea the funds came from drug trafficking. Number 6. Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, two young Texans whose early 1930s crime spree forever imprinted them on the national consciousnness, were possibly the most famous and romanticized criminals in American history. Their names have become synonymous with a vision of Depression-era chic, a world where women chewed cigars and brandished automatic rifles, men robbed banks and drove away in squealing automobiles, and life was lived quickly because it would be so short. Of course, myth is rarely accurate. The myth promotes the idea of a stylish couple who broke the rules and became a threat to the status quo, who didn't fear the cops and lived a life of glamorous luxury outrunning them. The truth was a little different. Bonnie and Clyde and the Barrow gang led a hard, uneasy life that was punctuated by narrow escapes, botched robberies, injury, and murder. They became one of the first outlaw media stars after police discovered photos of them playing with guns, and the myth-making machine began to work its transformative magic. Their fame would soon turn sour, and their lives would be cut short by a bloody police ambush, but their dramatic and untimely demise would only add luster to their legend. While the longevity of the Bonnie and Clyde story may be due to the power of myth and media rather than the couple's actual characteristics, there is no doubt that their story continues to fascinate writers, musicians, visual artists, and filmmakers. We look at 9 facts about the real Bonnie and Clyde that you might not find in film adaptations of their story. In movies and on television, Bonnie and Clyde were portrayed as habitual bank robbers who terrorized financial institutions throughout the Midwest and South. This is not the case. The Barrow gang robbed less than 15 banks during their 4 years of operation, some of them multiple times. Despite their efforts, they usually got away with very little as $80 in one case. Clyde and criminal associate Raymond Hamilton were mostly responsible for the few successful bank robberies associated with Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie would occasionally drive the getaway car, but more often than not, she stayed at a hideout while the rest of the gang robbed the bank. Banks were a difficult proposition for Bonnie and Clyde, and they rarely attempted bank jobs when they were on their own. They mostly robbed small grocery stores and gas stations because the risk was lower and the escapes were easier. Unfortunately, the take from these types of robberies was usually low, which meant they had to commit robberies more frequently just to make ends meet. The frequency of these robberies made Bonnie and Clyde easier to track, and they found it increasingly difficult to settle anywhere for an extended period of time. Number 7. The Great Brinks Robbery. At the time, the Great Brinks Robbery was the largest armed robbery in U.S. history. The robbers vanished after stealing $2.7 million, leaving no trace. It was nearly the ideal crime. Almost. On January 17, 1950, it occurred at the Brinks Armored Car Depot in Boston's North End. The gang of 11 who stole the money after 2 years of meticulous planning nearly succeeded. They failed because they couldn't agree on how to divide the spoils. All of them were apprehended by police 5 days before the statute of limitations expired. Robbery in Brinks. The heist was planned by career criminal Anthony Fats Pino, not Joseph Big Joe McGinnis. McGinnis planned the crime. Pino also enlisted the help of a gang to keep an eye on the depot for 18 months to see when it had the most money. The gang stole alarm system plans from the depot and then returned them undetected. They also removed the cylinders from the locks one by one and had the keys duplicated by a locksmith. The Brinks robbery took 2 years to plan and included 6 failed attempts. The gang dressed in Brinks uniforms, navy pea coats and chauffeurs' caps, as well as rubber Halloween masks. On January 17, 1950, at 6:55 p.m., 7 of the gang members entered the counting room. They caught the 5 employees off guard and bound and gagged them face down on the floor. The robbers stole everything except the General Electric payroll. They loaded 14 canvas bags with a half-ton of cash, coins, checks, securities, and money orders in 35 minutes. 2 gang members were waiting outside in the getaway truck, number 8, Harry Winston's Diamond Heist. When Harry Winston Paris opened on October 6, 2007, 4 hooded thieves were already inside, along with $36,683,281 and well-defended jewels. It was impossible to explain how they got there. The keys, which are kept off-site by a security company each night, were delivered to Harry Winston's security guard at 9:30 a.m. as usual. The guard then waited outside the building for the staff to arrive, as is customary. Employees are not allowed to enter the premises alone, nor are they allowed to leave with the keys. Harry Winston is well known for selling, as its slogan suggests, rare jewels of the world. The Paris store is housed in a neoclassical chateau on Avenue Montaigne in the opulent Golden Triangle district of the Champs-Élysées, alongside haute couture flagships such as Dior, Gucci, and Valentino. On that Saturday, an emerald necklace at Harry Winston cost nearly $3 million. It, like all the other rocks in the store, would soon vanish. The heist took less than 30 minutes. It all started at 9:50 a.m., when Import-Export Director Emery Capdev arrived and told the security guard to open the side door. He turned off the general alarm as they passed through the safety vestibule. Harry's Grand Salon smelled the same as it always did, faintly of white orchids. The guard left the keys at his desk and went to the restroom, passing glass display cases of ruby earrings, sapphire cluster bracelets, and platinum watches frosted with brilliants. Given the sophisticated alarm system in place in the police station a few doors down the block, there was no reason to believe that the entire glittering contents of the shop could be stolen, especially in broad daylight on the right bank. Several hundred of the 881 stolen Harry Winston pieces were discovered on Dantu's property, but 493 remain unaccounted for. It's unclear where they went. Some of them were most likely smuggled out of France on flights they took before being apprehended. When they tried to free one of the gemstones from its clamps, it shattered. Another is said to have landed in an unusual location, number 9, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft. 13 works of art were stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston early on March 18, 1990. The thieves tied the guards up and looted the museum for an hour after the guards admitted 2 men posing as police officers responding to a disturbance call. The case remains unsolved, no arrests have been made, and no artifacts have been recovered. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and art dealers have estimated the stolen works to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The museum is offering a $10 million reward for information that helps find the artwork. This is the most money that a private institution has ever offered as a reward. The stolen works were purchased by art collector Isabella Stewart Gardner, 1840 to 1924, for permanent display at the museum alongside the rest of her collection. The concert, one of only 34 known paintings by Johannes Vermeer and thought to be the most valuable unrecovered painting in the world, was among them. Rembrandt's only seascape, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, is also missing. Other paintings and sketches by Rembrandt, Edgar Degas, Edouard Manet, and Govert Flint, as well as a relatively insignificant eagle finial and Chinese gu, were stolen. Experts were perplexed by the selection of artwork because more valuable works were left untouched. Since the collection and its layout are set in stone, the empty frames are a tribute to the missing works and a place to put them when they come back. The FBI believes the robbery was orchestrated by a criminal organization. Because there is little physical evidence in the case, the FBI has relied heavily on interrogations, undercover informants, and sting operations to gather information. They have primarily targeted the Boston Mafia, which was embroiled in an internal gang war at the time. According to one theory, gangster Bobby Donati organized the robbery in order to negotiate the release of his capo regime. Donati was murdered a year after the robbery. According to other accounts, the paintings were stolen by a gang in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood, though they deny involvement. Even after a sting operation landed some of them in prison. Even though they were all offered money, shorter prison sentences, or even freedom if they helped find the art, they all denied knowing anything about it or gave false leads. Infrared motion detectors tracked the thieves' movements through the museum. The first room they entered, the Dutch room on the second floor, did not have any steps recorded until 1:48 a.m. This happened 13 minutes after they had taken down the guards, possibly so that the police wouldn't be called. As the thieves approached the paintings in the Dutch room, a device that normally trips when a patron gets too close to a painting began beeping. It was smashed by the thieves. They threw The Storm on the Sea of Galilee and a lady and gentleman in black on the marble floor, shattering the glass frames. They cut the canvases from their stretchers with the blade. A large Rembrandt self-portrait oil painting was also removed from the wall but was left leaning against a cabinet. Investigators believe they thought it was too large to transport, possibly because it was painted on wood rather than more durable canvas like the others. Instead, the thieves stole a small Rembrandt self-portrait etching displayed beneath the larger portrait. They removed the concert and landscape with obelisk from their frames on the right side of the room. The last item removed from the room was an ancient Chinese vase. At 1:51 a.m., one thief continued working in the Dutch room, while the other entered the short gallery, a narrow hallway on the opposite end of the second floor. Soon after, the other thief arrived. They began removing screws from a frame displaying a Napoleonic flag in this room, most likely in an attempt to steal the flag. They appeared to have given up halfway through because not all of the screws were removed, and they ultimately took only the exposed eagle finial atop the flagpole. In addition, they took 5 Degas sketches from the room. Chez Tony from the Blue Room on the first floor was the most recent work stolen. The motion detectors at the museum did not detect any movement in the Blue Room during the thieves' stay. The only footsteps heard in the room that night were those of a bath, who had passed through the gallery twice earlier on his patrol. The thieves checked on the guards one last time before leaving, asking if they were comfortable. They then went to the security director's office and took the videocassettes that had been recorded on the closed-circuit cameras as well as the data printouts from the motion detecting equipment. The movement data was still saved on a hard drive, which was never accessed. The Chez Tony frame was left on the security director's desk. The thieves then proceeded to remove the artwork from the museum, opening the side entrance doors once at 2:40 a.m. and once more at 2:45 a.m. The heist lasted 81 minutes. When the next guard shift arrived later in the morning, they realized something was wrong when they couldn't make contact with anyone inside to be let in. They summoned the security director, who, upon entering the building with his keys, discovered no one at the watch desk and called the cops. The police searched the building until they discovered the guards, who were still bound in the basement. Number 10, the Pink Panther Gang. A shadowy network of extremely ambitious robbers has targeted some of the world's most luxurious jewelry stores, committing outrageous crimes worthy of a Hollywood film script. Despite the fact that many members are still at large, justice may be served once and for all. The Pink Panther, released in 1963, is a classic comedy crime adventure film that launched the late British actor Peter Sellers into stardom and spawned a popular franchise that lasted nearly 40 years. However, in recent times, this fictional fantasy has lent its name to an international criminal nightmare that spans 2 decades. The elusive gang known as the Pink Panthers continues to terrorize the global jewelry industry after hundreds of heists totaling nearly $1 billion in losses. The gang has carried out well-planned and elaborate robberies all over the world, most notably in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. However, the members of the gang did not choose their moniker. It was instead given by Interpol due to the audacity of their crimes. The Pink Panthers' legendary trademark is their ability to carry out robberies in minutes with carefully planned and precise attacks. However, while the gang's activities continue to this day, they may be nearing the end of their time. Members of the gang are thought to be ex-soldiers with extensive military and paramilitary backgrounds. They are from Serbia, Montenegro, and other former Yugoslavian states and are survivors of the Bosnian War looking for unconventional ways to put their hardened skills to use. There is no official information about how many people are in the criminal network, but Interpol thinks there are about 800 core members and an unknown number of people in the extended international network. The Pink Panthers are not your typical criminal organization. Rather, they are a sophisticated global network of thieves. The gang is compared to a terrorist organization, with cells that can be activated at any time to participate in a planned heist. Although the Pink Panthers frequently carry firearms during raids, they claim that they do not shoot or kill people, but rather use weapons to intimidate victims into submission. The gang has also been known to use attractive women in many of their operations, especially as lookouts during raids and reconnaissance missions. Smash and Grab: The Story of the Pink Panthers, a documentary film about the notorious gang, was released in 2013. It had interviews with a few of the gang's alleged leaders. They talked about the group's history and talked about some of the well-planned robberies they had done. Always be aware of your surroundings, because you never know when criminals are watching. This video has discussed a few of the most successful crimes in history, which may help you know what to be on the lookout for. Finally, you may have seen a lot of criminal activity in your life and wonder why it is the case. You might be like, how can they do this? Why did they do this? If you haven't experienced it, you will probably see 1 or 2 successful crimes when you look up a list online. This video would have helped to explain why people commit crimes and also some of the most successful cases in history. Hopefully, you will find this to be an interesting video and want to learn more about it after watching the video. Please consider subscribe to this channel and don't forget to like the video to help the channel out.